Good morning. I'm Tim Gerdeman, Vice Chair and Co-founder and Chief Marketing Officer of Water Tower Research. I'm being joined today for this special WTR Small Cap Spotlight podcast by global lithium industry expert and podcast personality Joe Lowry and my colleague and senior research analyst Dmitry Silversteyn to discuss high-level trends in the lithium industry as this critical battery material is a closely followed issue on Wall Street. Joe and Dmitry, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. Glad to be here.
Joe, the lithium industry has had quite a roller coaster ride the last few years as it relates to selling prices, as well as the revenue and profit trajectories of various industry players. Can you please discuss the current state the industry finds itself in as it relates to demand and supply trends, production levels, and expectations for prices of lithium carbonate and hydroxide, please?
Well, roller coaster is a great word to use for the lithium industry. If you go back 5 years, two companies were selling product into China at less than $4,000 a ton for lithium carbonate. That was in 2020. By November 2022, there were spot sales in China at 80,000. A huge change. We're sitting now around the $10,000 level for lithium carbonate and lithium hydroxide. And that price is, the prices used to have a variance based on contracts that was significant. That's narrowed quite a bit. We are still in a bit of an oversupply situation, but it's not significant. But I would go back to 2022 when the price really ran. Well, it started in 2021. And the undersupply was not that substantial either. The Chinese panicked. They bid up the price. The Chinese are very smart people. They figured out a solution to the problem because the high prices made resources like lepidolite and direct shipped ore economic, where in a $10,000 world, they're essentially far off the economic classification. I see right now that the market's tightened quite a bit, but it's still slightly in oversupply. The real issue right now, though, is that China's controlling the narrative. Just two players in China control almost 50% of the demand in this industry, and that would be CATL and BYD. Combined, they have a little over 50% of the battery business, and batteries about 90% now of the overall lithium demand. So those two players are very well educated now about how to manage the supply chain, how to manage the narrative. And CATL actually runs uneconomic lithium supply because for their overall economics, it makes perfect sense. They can use lithium carbonate from their lepidolite mine as a loss leader, keep enough product in the market to keep the slight oversupply and then save money on instead of paying 22 or 24,000 a ton if it was in shortage. Their whole buy is enhanced by running an uneconomic lithium operation.
Great. Thanks for that kickoff, Joe. I'll now turn it over to Dmitry to ask a few questions, and I'll not be shy about chiming in along the way. Dmitry?
Hi, Joe, and welcome to the program as well. It was a pleasure to speak with you. Let's talk about the geographic breakdown of lithium mining and processing, which is two separate concepts. You mentioned some of it already in your comments, but historically, Chile, Argentina, Australia have been the main sources of lithium. And China has established itself as a 800-pound gorilla when it comes to lithium carbonate and lithium hydroxide production. More recently, we've seen the Chilean government take a more, let's call it hands-on approach when it comes to financially benefiting from lithium mining in the country. And we've seen other regions, including other parts of Latin America, as well as US, Canada, and even Europe, get behind discovery and development of lithium resources in their countries. Can you discuss how the global competitive landscape is changing with respect to future sources of lithium, as well as metal processing infrastructure?
That's a really interesting question, because you're correct. If you go back in my history on this, I entered the industry in 1990, so I'm 35 years in. And at that time, it was Chile in the United States, ironically enough. It morphed into Australia becoming significant. Argentina entered the game. Before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about FMC's operation down there, but that never got to a scale where it was globally significant. So in 2025, what you're seeing is, from the precursor perspective, Australia is far and away the leader. Most of that material goes to China to be converted. It's a little different story on the brine side. Chile, Argentina, they both produce chemicals associated with the projects that produce the starting material. There are some cases where that product also has to be upgraded, but if you think of the world in terms of hard rock and brine, hard rock's a precursor, brine is essentially the way those projects are planned, chemical production that's integrated with the original build. Going forward, what you've seen with the run up in price in 2022 that I've already alluded to, the Chinese developed their own lithium assets. And that's the real irony here is people in the mindset is that China dominates the lithium world. They're actually the most dependent country in lithium from the standpoint of raw material. Within their borders, they have low quality brines and low quality hard rock, and they don't have enough of that to even fulfill half their needs. So they have to go to Western Australia, to South America, to Africa. On the processing side, though, it's a different story. They are completely dominant in processing into lithium chemicals. And it's more broad than that because their lead in cathode materials is even greater than their lead in lithium processing. They make about 75% of the lithium chemicals from the processing side. They make 80% of the cathode. So that's in a nutshell. The world supply is broadened, but for hard rock players, China's the only game in town.
So speaking of industry players, and you mentioned a couple of them already, can you tell our audience who some of the major lithium producers are currently who are commercially successful, as well as maybe highlight some second-tier participants who are either ramping up production or getting close to commercial production that our listeners should pay attention to?
Well, most of my career, there was what we called the big three, which is no longer a thing, but that was what's now Albemarle, what's now actually Rio Tinto's lithium operation, which has gone through many iterations, and SQM. That morphed into a big four. FMC dropped out. They just didn't expand enough to stay globally significant. And you had two Chinese players, Tianqi and Ganfeng Lithium, join the fray. So the top, let's just say the top players in the world right now, the biggest is Albemarle. And I'm speaking to you from Charlotte, North Carolina, which is where Albemarle's based, but most of their resource play is in Western Australia and Chile, and most of their conversions in China. So they are the global leader. SQM would be number two, Ganfeng 3, Tianqi 4, and soon, and we can debate how soon is, but Rio Tinto, with their balance sheet, ought to be able to take all the great assets they bought from the Arcadium acquisition within 5 to 7 years and become, if not the largest player on the planet, in the top two. Emerging players, that's a really interesting question too, because we hear a lot about direct lithium extraction or DLE, and that's not really commercial yet. It's becoming commercial, let's put it that way. A lot of people like to say what FMC did at Hombre Muerto is DLE. It's a modified form of DLE, but if you have to have ponds, the way I look at it, you're not really doing pure direct lithium extraction. If you want to develop the smackover, as Exxon, Equinor, and some others do, the big oil field reservoir in Arkansas and Texas and some other tangential states, you're going to have pure direct lithium extraction because those places don't have the evaporation characteristics that would allow the use of ponds. And that's really the big question for the future is when is DLE commercial, fully commercial in a pure form? You just had Aramid start up, but they're clearly having problems as they, with great fanfare, announced one shipment and been silent for a while since. So um, I follow that quite closely. Um, and I think you also really are wanting to touch on geothermal. And I, I personally believe that's a dog that doesn't hunt. I was involved going back 11 or 12 years in the Salton Sea. Elon Musk actually made a great offer for one of those companies, and the investors were foolish enough to decline it, or they'd be worth billions of dollars now with the run up in Tesla's stock he offered. But that company sold in receivership a few years later for $2 million. Now you have, because Berkshire is tangentially involved here through Mid America Energy, everybody likes to say, Warren Buffett's involved in the Salton Sea, and that's clearly a distortion of reality.
I appreciate that. And that was actually going to be my last question about the commercial capabilities or abilities of direct lithium extraction, DLE. It's been talked about seriously for at least 5 years. There's been a lot of pilot plants that have had somewhat successful runs, but they seem to be running into trouble at commercial scale.
Yeah.
And I think it all boils down to the fact that you have to process so much material, and you have to spend the capital for such large material handling installation. How do you make the economics works for what little lithium you get out of it?
Well, I do think by 2032, 2033, DLE will be a viable part or a reasonable part of lithium production, but I think it'll take that long. And I think the bigger problem has been the DLE companies have been little, like junior companies that were undercapitalized, and you have to have a big balance sheet to play this game. And Exxon has that balance sheet, Equinor has that balance sheet, but they still have to execute.
Yeah.
And that's really where we are in the storyline. And if DLE is not successful, you will long term see much higher lithium prices.
Well,
The hard rock cost curve, based on the quality of the resources that are out there. There's plenty of lithium, and Elon likes to say lithium's everywhere, and to some extent that's true. Economic lithium is not everywhere, and the economics of developing the 3 million tons you need versus, this market didn't reach 300,000 until 2020. And there aren't that many industries that grow 10x that aren't software anyway. There aren't that many industries that grow 10x in a decade. And that's where we are.
What do you think about the companies that are trying to stand up the lithium business in the U.S., whether you're talking about Piedmont or Lithium Americas? And their projects are probably kind of middle of the hard rock or clay cost curve.
Sedimentary is like the word we like to use. Clay is kind of passe, but a lot of people still use that word. I think I was out at Thacker Pass in December. I've been involved with Lithium Americas for a long time. I actually raised the money for their project at Cachari before they split into Lithium Argentina and Lithium Americas. And the CEO of Lithium Americas is my ex-boss at FMC. So I probably don't speak from a completely balanced perspective there, but I do believe that, especially with Bechtel building this and Bechtel making some pretty bold statements recently about this being the Hoover Dam project of this era, and they built the Hoover Dam. I think that if you look at it objectively, obviously that the sedimentary assets are going to be a little bit higher on the cost curve than, say, the Atacama, but that asset has as much lithium as the Atacama. So a success there will be a major success for the United States. But again, we have to execute and prove it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we talked a lot about lithium metal and lithium processing. The growth of EV industry is obviously the major driver, as you mentioned, of lithium demand. It's not now 90% of demand is driven by EV growth, and by extension, it dictates lithium pricing. EV battery technology has also been evolving at a pretty rapid pace, trying to address market concerns around range anxiety, charging speed, safety profile, and of course, production costs to get to parity with ICE vehicles. Um, Given all of that, what are some of the battery technologies currently competing in the market, and what new technologies or battery chemistries are being developed or commercialized uh, that can sort of impact the demand for lithium in the near to midterm?
Well, that is another great question. You guys are very good at formulating questions because what happens with technology is going to have a huge impact on the development of the lithium industry. Because if you went to a metal type battery, which was the original invention, when Exxon invented the rechargeable lithium battery in the 70s, that was lithium metal was the lithium source and it was in the anode. So um, I see a lot of things happening. LFP is gone to yet another generation. And if you listen to the Albemarles and some of the big players 7 or 8 years ago, their investments were in hydroxide. They said by this year, 2025, that lithium hydroxide would be 70% of demand because of high nickel chemistries. Everybody bought into what Tesla did and thought that was the future. The unfortunate reality of that is those cars cost too much. And if you want ubiquitous EV penetration, you need a $30,000, a $40,000 car. If you're in the third world, you need a much cheaper vehicle than that. So I think you're going to have a bifurcated growth path. You're still going to see the solid state development. You're still going to see a lithium metal future at the high end, but I still say that the death of LFP was greatly exaggerated, and the fact that it is gaining share every year is something that's going to be around for a while, especially as they keep improving it, and especially as China keeps making breakthroughs in charging speed and the range you can get uh, on one charge with what are essentially low cost batteries.
Let me ask you a little different question. In the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years, you don't see, or do you see technologies such as solid state lithium or you know, ferrous-based lithium, or or I'm sorry, ferrous-based batteries uh, playing a big role in sort of the market balance as far as batteries for EVs are concerned?
I would
And
say,
I'm going to tag along, Joe. I'm going to
okay,
rudely tag
go
along
ahead.
to that question because something that's been on my mind literally for years and years is there any technology coming down the pike that could be an existential risk to lithium for batteries?
Well, you don't look that much younger than I am, and I think not in our lifetimes. Let me put it to you that way. I mean, just look at the periodic table. And everybody said, hydrogen was going to be the next big thing for there was a number of years, and even Toyota. I went to Toyota City the first time in 2002, and they were talking hydrogen then, and they've never really gone full scale on lithium. I mean, they'll talk lithium one year and then go back to hybrids, bring a hydrogen back into the argument. So it's a crapshoot. But what you see in China is steady development across the board. You see them pushing solid state. You see them improving LFP. They're doing new variations of nickel, mid nickel, high nickel with a twist. There's a lot of work going on, but I don't think there's one winner, and I don't think you're going to see a metallic battery in the coming decade that obviates the need for multiple solutions at different price points.
Understood, Joe. Thank you. Before we end our discussion, we should talk about the current geopolitical landscape a little bit, including the U.S.-China confrontation and reciprocal tariffs. Um, what are your thoughts on these crosswinds, and what do you think the near-term impact may be on the lithium industry specifically?
That's a really tough question to answer. I lived in China during what I consider the golden era for expats. I moved back here almost 15 years ago, and but I saw how China deftly adjusts policy to get outcomes. And they were a supplicant back then. And if you look at this industry, 15 years ago, nobody in China made a lithium chemical that could be used in a high-end battery. Just 15 years ago. Ganfeng didn't even start making carbonate and hydroxide until after that. So you've seen this massive change, and they have targeted this clean energy and the lithium ion battery space. So I think we ought to take a chapter out of China's book. When I was first moved to China, GM had joint ventures, Volkswagen had joint ventures to build up their ICE business, and you had to operate under certain rules. I think we ought to have Chinese LFP technology. LFP was invented at the University of Texas. We invented the rechargeable battery, and we invented the most used cathode. We just can't seem to make it these days. I would like to see, and I'm not directly answering your question because I don't know what's going to happen in the short term, because tell me what Donald Trump is going to say tomorrow and you'll be better than I am. And I'm not necessarily criticizing the idea. I do think the execution's chaos, but I think if you take a step back and look, we would be much better served if we had some kind of deal with guardrails on bringing what China's learned in the last 15 years to this country and allow them to manufacture. And I heard Trump say on CNBC he would be fine with the Chinese building products in the U.S., but if they did it in Mexico and tried to import them, he'd slap a massive tariff on them. So I'm not good enough to know how this current tit for tat plays out, but I am smart enough not to bet against China.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe Lowry, for letting us glean insights into how you're thinking about the lithium industry, not only in 2025, but in the years to come. I always look forward to your very colorful and detailed lithium podcast and feel honored to get a few minutes of your time here today as the world's foremost lithium industry expert.
My pleasure.
Also, thanks to my equity research colleague, Dmitry Silversteyn. To read Dmitry's industry and company-specific equity research reports, as well as to access countless other small-cap equity research reports from Water Tower Research, please go to www.watertowerresearch.com.